Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. If you were here yesterday or the last couple of days, I certainly appreciate you being here. My name is Russell Rucker. I am the author of Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic, which is just above my head, a poster of it. And I'm also the author of Our Founders and Why They Matter. And there is a poster off to my left. This is my book, Our Founders and Their Words and Why They Matter. Today we're going to discuss the Declaration of Independence. We're going to talk about the Continental Congress a little bit, and what led to our independence. My books primarily are about the Constitution. They're about the period of time in which the Constitution was adopted, the Declaration of Independence, that whole revolutionary period. I'd really like to thank Reader's Magnet for giving me the opportunity to be here at Festival of Storytellers. I really appreciate the time, and I appreciate everyone that tunes in. I'm glad you're here, and so let's just start a little bit. You know, the Continental Congress was established because we were having trouble with the Toleration Acts that Britain had instituted, and it's really the first time that the colonies worked together, acting as a nation. Okay, and they all gathered, all but Georgia. The reason Georgia wasn't there was they were having dealing with an Indian uprising at the time, so they just couldn't attend. But they were called into session in 1774, and between September 5th and October 10th, they met in Carpenter's Hall, which is around the corner from what we know of today as Independence Hall or the State House. So the first meeting there was at Carpenter's Hall, and some of our founders are pretty big names that were there, like John Adams, George Washington, and John Jay. And they passed a few things while they were in session. And, you know, they were really trying to get the attention of the King of England, King George, and they wanted him to back down to the Intolerable Acts. And the first thing they did was they passed the Declaration of Rights. And what the Declaration of Rights did was it proclaimed loyalty to the king, first of all. And that shouldn't be a big surprise because back in that period of time, many of the citizens referred to themselves as the most loyal king's subject. It was a matter of respect and honor to the king. After all, we were still part of England, so the king, King George, was our king. Okay. The other thing it did was it denied the British government's right to tax. And that's what the whole issue here was with taxation, because you had this 7-year war, and here it was called the French and Indian War, and the coffers of Britain were pretty well broke, and they were trying to pay off their debt. And the main place they could go was the American colonies, because frankly, we were the wealthiest in the group of the British Empire at the time. The next thing they passed was the Article of Association. Now, the Article of Association called for the colonies to stop importing British goods as of December 1st, 1774, unless Britain repealed the Intolerable Acts. Obviously, Britain had no intention of doing that. They were trying to raise money. And then they disbanded, and they agreed to meet again on May 10th, 1775, if Britain didn't come to some kind of solution by then. So they were really trying to get Britain's attention. The Articles of Association called for an end to trade with England until they reneged. So that ended the First Continental Congress. And as promised, they came back the next year in 1775, and they started the second session of the Continental Congress. But this time they weren't meeting in Carpenter's Hall. This time they were meeting in Independence Hall. I actually have a small diagram of it over here. You probably can't see it real well, but that's Independence Hall, otherwise known as the Pennsylvania State House. Okay, and they met there in the Pennsylvania State House. And the thing is, by 1775, by the time they met, we were a month into the conflict, because in April 18th, I think it's 18th and 19th of 1775, that's when the conflict began, where Paul Revere came out of Lexington and Concord, came out of Boston, and they went out towards Lexington and Concord. The British were out there trying to get armaments from the colonists, and that started the whole war. And we'll do a show on that next week to discuss the actual beginning of it. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that part of it. Okay, but one of the first things they did was they formed a Continental Army. And then they appointed Washington as commander-in-chief. So he really was no longer there at that time. By 1775, he had gone out to Boston, where the colonists, the Minutemen, had surrounded Boston, and he was sent out there to take over the troops and basically take control of our army. The next thing they did was they passed the Declaration of Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms. Now, this was authored by John Dickinson. John Dickinson also wrote letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania, which was really a long series of articles in the paper trying to get rid of the Intolerable Acts the same way as we had gotten rid of the Stamp Act. And we also sent over to Britain, with the Declaration of Causes, the Olive Branch Petition. Now, the Olive Branch Petition was really the last effort to convince the king that we don't want independence, we don't want this war, we just want you to accept our own ability to tax ourselves, to govern ourselves. Unfortunately, the king refused to even look at it. So time marched on a little bit after these acts were passed. We started the conflict. Washington was up there manning troops, and we were basically at war by now. In the spring of 1776, Common Sense is published. Thomas Paine published Common Sense, and it argues extensively about the small island that governs us, about our ability with our raw materials to make ships that really this was the time, and we could defeat him. And a king can't be trusted; he has to be looked after. All these things are in Common Sense, and it sold massively. Now, Thomas Paine took almost no money for his publication, for his book, because he was trying to get as many out the door as he could, because he was really involved in trying to work towards independence. And Common Sense really changed the mood in the country for independence. On June 7th, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia proposed independence. And there were members there that really didn't want independence. And there were numerous votes taking place. And the colonies started recalling their delegates. See, in the Continental Congress, each state was allowed 3 to 7 delegates. So, and they only had one vote. So they would have to gather together and agree to vote in the manner that they had all agreed to. So the colonies started recalling their members that weren't for independence. The Congress set up a committee of 5 to write a declaration. And the committee of 5 consists of John Adams, Robert Livingston, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Robert Sherman. So that's really the authors of our Declaration of Independence. So they worked on a Declaration of Independence. And in my book, I go through the Declaration, and I use an older version of the Declaration before things were changed, while they were still hashing it over. And so it's a little different than you're generally used to. I have here, this is a Declaration of Independence that is actually to scale. Okay, I like to show this sometimes because it really does give you an idea of what's happening. And of course, John Hancock's signature is larger than everyone else's. There's a story that he signed it big enough so the king could see it. But there's also a possibility that he never signed it, that the printer, because he was president of the Continental Congress, just automatically put his name there. So that gives you kind of an idea of the possibility of what happened there. Now, the Declaration of Independence is an important document. Woodrow Wilson said it was not, in a 4th of July speech, said it was not a rhetoric, a document of rhetoric, but a document of something that had to happen. But I think it also is a very rhetorical document. And I'm going to read some of it here. And what's really nice about what I've done, the great favor I've done for you here in the book, is I've numbered the complaints to the king. So if you're studying it, you can look back at the numbered item. But it begins, and keep in mind, this is the original version before it was altered. A declaration of the representatives of the United States of America in General Council assembled. And then it begins where we're used to hearing it. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of earth the separate and equal station in which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the causes of which impel them to the separation. So he's acknowledging that God is of importance with God's law and nature's law, and he's saying that we are required to actually list the reasons why we want to separate. So he goes on, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inherent and inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, depriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish and to institute new government, laying its foundation on principles and organizing its powers in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So this is getting into the original idea of why they're doing this. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are most disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So they're telling us that it has to be serious, that it can't be a light or transient reason and why we have to declare independence. Now, I all got some early questions here. I'm going to go through them before we get into the actual complaints here. Kimberly, these are quite complicated concepts, but Russell breaks them down nicely. Well, thank you very much for that kind compliment. I really try to get to it, so thank you. Ross says, according to the Declaration, what specific rights do the free and independent states claim? Well, they claim that we have the right to life, liberty, and we have the right to pursuit of happiness. And in a real early version, it was actually written pursuit of property, which gives you an idea of what they were actually saying. John says, hi, Russell. What do you think is important to write more books? Russell, why do you think it's more important to write more books like yours? I think it's important because a lot of times there are misunderstandings of what our Declaration really was all about, what our Constitution was about, what the Bill of Rights were. And there's such a political atmosphere in our country that one side or the other wants to change the meaning of things, and it becomes a real serious situation. And I think we have to help our fellow citizens really understand the importance of it all. So, Ross, also, why do you think the authors made the point that the king conducted himself as a dictator? Well, I think it almost becomes obvious that as you read through it, the complaints and why they think that he felt as a why he acted in a dictatorial way. He just wasn't going to put up with the colonists behaving in such a way. He didn't see them as equal English citizens. And our colonists saw them as saw themselves as English citizens. Sophie says, do you think topics like these should be talked about more, especially in academics? Yes, very much so. And I think that's part of our, I think that is really part of our problem, is that things just aren't taught in school as much as they should be. Benjamin says, do you think without common sense being published, it would have taken longer for the independence movement? Yes, I do, because common sense galvanized the colonists that they had to change. If you go through and you read Common Sense, you cannot come out the other side. And this is a pamphlet, it's not a full book. You can't come out the other side at the end of Common Sense and come to any other conclusion that we have to have independence. And that's really, what's important there. And I think it might not even have happened without common sense, although we were fighting originally to begin with. Okay, but I'm going to get in for a couple of minutes here, and I really want to get into some of the complaints. Now, I've numbered them so that they're easy for reference. Number one, he has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. And when we're talking about he, they're talking about the king. So they're saying that the king would not allow laws that were for our benefit. Two, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. So remember, we're individual colonies, and the governors of each individual colony is actually dictating and running things on behalf of the king. So Virginia's governors acting, as an agent for the King of England, the same as Delaware's and Connecticut and Massachusetts is. And that was kind of the whole problem. They weren't being listened to. They were being taxed, as they say, without any representation, because we had nobody representing us in Britain in their government. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the rights of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. So here again, we're talking about how they're really just running over the top of us, and they aren't going to abide by our wishes. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. So he's calling a legislative body together to discuss something, probably in, say, England, where we can't hardly attend. Remember, it takes a long time to cross the Atlantic. It's not an easy trip. You don't do it in a couple of weeks. And so if you're going to create bodies to discuss our needs, it becomes a problem when we can't even attend. 5, he has dissolved representative houses repeatedly and continually for opposing with manly firmness his invasion on the rights of the people. Now, I think this goes directly to when they disbanded the House of Burgess. And they disbanded the House of Burgess down in Virginia. And the members ran over to the bar when they found they were going to be disbanded, and they met in the tavern and tried to conduct some business there before they were technically disbanded. So, I mean, all these things, all these complaints come down to exactly the idea that we need to be independent from England. He has refused for a long time after such dissolution to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the danger of invasion from without and convulsions within. Though he's talking about invasions and dangers, and a lot of time, they were using Indians to fight back and forth, and these were problems. There just wasn't any safety. In fact, at one time up in upstate New York, there was almost nobody living there because between the ongoing hostilities with the Indians were nearly wiped out, and so were the white men. So it was quite a problem. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to engage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So not only is they going after the government, they're restricting our flow of immigrants. I want to go forward a little bit because there's a couple here I want to be sure I get to. The 20th is really, it gets to the crux of our slavery issue. And slavery was a very divisive thing for the first 100 years until we went through the Civil War. So number 20, he has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery into another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. The piratical warfare, the opium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain the exercitable commerce, and that the assemblings of whores might want no fact or distinguished dye. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms amongst us and to purchase that liberty of which he was depriving them by murdering the people on whom he also obstructed them, thus paying off the crimes committed against the liberty of one people with the crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. That section goes on a little ways, but it gets to a good point. And 19 and 20 didn't make it out of the committee. But I think it's important to understand and go through exactly what their original intent was. That things are always watered down over time as they debate and get agreement, and it can change for times what the meaning of it is. Red asked me, where is the original Declaration of Independence now? Well, I think it's probably in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., but I'm not really sure on that one. Joyce, there are such important matters that I believe are being discussed that I believe aren't being discussed in schools. And boy, I agree with that. And that's why we have so much limited time to actually do teaching. And when you bring in subjects that aren't going to pertain to how our citizens need to understand things, the civics are important. And math, English, science, and those things are all important. And we need to get back to the basic study of what is important and what will help our citizens become good citizens. Ella says, the atmosphere of this discussion is so calming. It's very educational, but in such light and calmating setting. Thank you so much. I appreciate those kind words. And I want to yesterday there were some. I didn't get a chance to thank some people, and that had commented. We got through the questions, but not just the comments. And I really want to thank Dr. Jill Fredericks for the kind comments, and I want you to know I really appreciate that. And the same with Mary C. Martin and Kenneth Lee, Kenneth Lane, Jeff Lee, Everly Jackson, and Justin Matt. I appreciate you being here and listening to me. I really want you to understand, and that's why I wrote these books. I didn't write them just to write a book. I wrote them for a purpose of trying to educate the public, educate anyone that would listen, because so often things are we are told um, just are not the way they are. There are reasons why people will try to convince you something isn't so, and I find that very offensive. Really, I mean, I started probably 40 years ago studying the Constitution and all this, trying desperately to understand it myself, and now I'm trying to pass that on. You can get my books on Amazon. You can get the Barnes and Noble. You can get my website, russelljrucker.com. I also have a YouTube channel that's really important to me, and that's what this set here is for. That's why I have all this stuff here, is to try to tell the story of our founding and that. And I drop a video every week. You can search my name, Russell Rucker, and find videos. And I try to do one a week. They generally aren't as long as this segment. They're usually just a few minutes, maybe up to 20 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on what we're talking about. And it's generally an amendment or a part of the Constitution or some kind of historical significance. And so I would like you to subscribe to that. I also have a group in Facebook that discusses constitutional issues, and it can go sideways all over the place sometimes, depending on who comes up with something. But it's a very intellectual group. It's called Friends of Textualism and Originalism. So it's basically the friends of my first book. I tried to set this up so that you could discuss things with me back and forth, and I can explain why I said what I did. I'd like to thank you so much for your time today, but my time is gone, and I'll have to go. Tomorrow we're going to be discussing the different plans in the convention. So we'll be going through that a little bit. Thank you so much for your time. You have a good afternoon. We'll talk to you later. Thank you.